between Aalto University and UBC, the Bioproducts Institute and the FinCERES flagship. So very simple, very simple, very simple concepts. And I start with a picture that I took 14 years ago in Åbo Academy, now Åbo Academy University. And it's in Swedish, as you can appreciate. But it's a little drawing from 1944 about the things that you can do with a tree, with wood. And I always kept it, and I wanted to show, and now for the first time, I can show this slide in a way that signifies the opportunities that we have to use wood in different things. So as I said before, I'm not going to talk about cellulose, I'm not going to talk about lignin, but I will talk a little bit different aspect, and that is the smaller things, including extractives, tannin, and then I jump to the big things, and that will be the whole wood. So here we have, I guess you all recognize this species. It's all around campus. This is birch tree. And in the bark of birch tree, we have a number of functions that are really amazing if you think about it. We have water resistance. We have nutrient and transport of water, support and storage, rigidity, rot and pathogen resistance, antibacterial, fire retardancy, and antioxidant activity. So this is really amazing that we have in a tree built in all these functions. And that has been one of the principles of FinCERES, that we maximize the intelligence of nature. And this is a very good example. So there is something about bark, and I will start talking a little bit about that. And for that, I will rely on something that I put together with my good friend, Martin Hubie, North Carolina. That was, as you can appreciate, 2005, so quite a long time ago. At that time, we decided that when we think about paper making, there are a number of paradoxes. It's kind of very strange way, the way we make paper. Just to put an example, making paper, we take materials, we deconstruct wood, and then we put it back together. We add water, make the fibers wet, and we dry it. We call those paradoxes of paper making. And we found 7 paradoxes. Today, I will talk about 3 paradoxes in the aspect of bark biorefineries, tannins, and whole wood. The first paradox you will see relates to the use of bark. And if you think about it, this is probably the best use of bark. If you go to downtown Helsinki, the Helsinki design stores, you can find these lamps. And this is simply bark. It's beautiful. I also have seen baskets made from bark, and they are about 40, 50 euro. So that already tells you that there is something about bark that you can use from the point of view of art and design, really. But of course, we are chemists, material scientists, and engineers, and we want to do something different with this. So let me talk about the first paradox, is to have something that is order, we disorder it, and then we put it back together with again with order. And there is something to it. So that's the concept that you see here. For bark, the opportunity to take the materials and put them in an ordered fashion. We call this self-assembly. The first case is the case of triterpenes. For instance, in birch, we found betulin in the bark, and you can see the molecular structure of betulin. In the bottom, you can see the work of Chun Yu, who was here and now moved to Vancouver. So she has been working with these triterpenes to look into valorizing the material. And if you look at the bark of birch, this is what you see in the top. That is a whitish material that contains betulin in a very large concentration. And this is the mushy thing that you see there between the cells. If we extract betulin, of course, then you will leave behind the bark material free of betulin. And that bark contains fibers that are quite interesting for use. So that betulin that we extracted can lead to self-assemble, and this is what then we get. It's a beautiful crystalline structure of betulin that has been very well characterized from the crystallinity point of view. So these are needle-like materials that self-assemble after extraction. And they build this type of structures quite nicely. Now, experimentally, then, what you will see is that the initial extractives, self-assemble in the form of needles, go from A, B, C, D, up to E in a different morphologies that are quite interesting. And lately, we have been very interested to look into shape, in colloids, in the nanotechnologies that we work. Shape, forms, sizes matter. And I will give only one example how this really plays into an application. So the first thing is that the betulin self-assembles in crystals and then forms crystalline structures with this hedgehog structure that you see in the bottom. And we have followed these events, and we have found a number of steps that starts with a metastable aggregate, dislocation, solvent migration, and then radial growth. Beautiful. And this only requires sonication energy. And in our area, mechanochemistry, sonication chemistries will be becoming more and more important in the future. So this is a very simple process to put the betulin molecule from needle-like materials into rosette, hedgehog sort of structures like the ones that you can see here. And for those of you that work with surface chemistry, of course, you now realize that there is an opportunity for us to use these structures to put on the surface. And what we found is that those betulin used as a coating produce a surface, a coating surface that is very hydrophobic, water repellent, with very high contact angle. And then you can see that type of situation there. Very simple, extracting bark for its own function in the tree, in this case to engineer coatings in a very simple manner. That's what you see in the bottom. Of course, there are many things that I can say about betulin. This is only one. One of those is fire retardancy and making foams, quite nice from betulin, but this is one that is already being published. The second one relates to energy storage. So we go now for something a little bit more advanced. And here we have the same idea. We go from something that is ordered, we disorder by dissolution and extraction, and then we let the material to self-assemble. And this is the case of polyphenols, and in this case, ellagic acid. So here we have our collaborator, Junlin Guo from Sichuan University. And taking these polyphenols, there is a huge opportunity that I will show next. We published this very recently, and you can appreciate the opportunities in this area. What we did here was to take the ellagic acid, the polyphenol, that as you can imagine, make complexes with metals in aqueous solution, in this case, bismuth. And then using a solvent, NMP is a protic solvent, the material will self-assemble, forming an elementary structure like the one that you see here. And this is a coordination chemistry that happens. So it's beautiful. But what you will see next is the self-assembly of the material by the stackings via pi-pi interactions, making supramolecular structures like the one that you see here that we can think about as secondary structures. And this is not very typical in polysaccharides and other materials. This is more typical of proteins, nucleobases, and peptides. But here, we can see that this is also happening. And this secondary structure forms then eventually by dipole interactions, tertiary structures in the form of a filament construction. That's what you see on the blue figure. And they become then self-assembled into quaternary structures. That is a suprastructural assembly where electrostatic interactions play a very important role. How this looks in real life? Well, this type of needle-like materials are shown in the bottom. You can see those. And then if you look internally how the needle-like materials are self-assembled, then you can appreciate on the far right, these are needles of needles. So very interesting. What can we do with this? Well, here, this means a very simple process to manufacture microcolloidal particles. And they have shown very interesting materials as properties as devices for energy storage. So what we report here is the case of one of the best sodium energy storage performance based on the supramolecular chemistry of this type of very simple polyphenolic materials. Another polyphenolic material is the case of tannins, and we know tannins because of wine. So can we do more with this? And here the second paradox is add water to then take it away. What we do is we dissolve tannins in water and then we dry it. And in that process, something happens, something magic. That's also the case of cellulosic fibers in paper making. So here we have Bruno, who is a member in the group. He's currently working with tannins for many, many, many different purposes. But tannin is a beautiful molecule if you think about the properties of tannins. You can read those in the bottom. It's really an amazing molecule that you can find in many different tree species. So here, there is a very nice example. This is in collaboration with Patrick Rink that I see sitting here. The idea of predicting, being able to predict how the tannic acids will self-assemble in aqueous solution, forming different morphologies. And that's what you see on the left. In water, the tannic materials, the molecules, form one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional structures. And these structures have been mapped out in this type of space on the right, where we can control the pH and the counter ions to predict with very small number of experiments the type of assembly that will happen. That's what we have here. And this is a very good example of the use of machine learning in the optimization of the structures. So having this predictive power, now we can produce supramolecular structures of tannic acids. And what you see here on the right is the big space for morphologies that will emerge from tannic acid. And of course, here, the working principle is that these materials will have different functions. Tannic acid, tannins as a molecule have a number of functions. But then when we work with colloid chemistry, then additional functions will emerge. Now, it's not only a question of size and shapes, it's also the surface. And the best example that I can find for surfaces and the influence of the surface of a material in the function is the case of pollen particles. What you see on the left is images of different pollen particles. And nature has optimized the morphology on the surface of pollen for different functions. So what if we also do the same with these particles that we're talking about? This is very important because if we achieve that control on the surface morphology, not only shape and size, but the surface morphology, we can control properties like the ones that you see on the right: wetting behavior, friction, aerodynamics, hydrodynamics, encapsulation, and delivery. So really great opportunities if we control the surface morphology. And that we have shown in the case of the production of lignin particles. So this is the only mention to lignin that I will make now. We take this system where we put lignin in water and then we remove water to create particles. And those particles can be smooth, but they can also be wrinkled. And that's the idea that you see here when you look into the particles on top and in the bottom, that the degree of corrugation can be controlled, in fact. And that will control the interactions of the lignin particles in any application. One of those is emulsion stabilization. But as you see on the right, there are many, many more opportunities. So these are beautiful examples what we can do if we learn more about surface morphologies. This is a case of whole wood. I will give you a little bit of my thinking why whole wood can be of very big interest. Here, the paradox is divide to combine. So here we have Guillermo. Guillermo is over there. And Guillermo has been working with colleagues in Chile who have been collecting the residual biomass from blueberry. Blueberry production is very important in the US, in Canada, the second country. Of course, the best blueberries are from Finland. The best antioxidant properties are the blueberries from Finland. Anyway, there is a lot of woody biomass that is left. And I think in the future, we're going to see more and more reliance on the utilization of whole wood. What I've been looking here is to use the blueberry waste into a biorefinery concept. You can see that on the top for the production of platform chemicals. But when it comes to the residual biomass, here we can do a uniliquid solution to make textile materials. So this is a nice example that I want to share with you from the work of Guillermo. The idea here is to take the dissolution of the biomass, whole biomass, and then doing spinning by using a coagulation. Here we have solvent exchange, and the filaments then will be formed by this solvent exchange. This is the process that he used. And then you will see that the filaments are really brownish. And this is because they contain a very high level of lignin as well as tannins. And then you see the collector. Very cool filaments. What is beautiful in this case, despite the fact that he's not using stretching or drawing, nevertheless, very strong filaments are produced. And we had an accident here. A lady who works with coral reef in the coast of Mexico in Cozumel, she has been working for many years, installing things underwater, like the ones that you see in the bottom, to try to grow coral in an area that is depleted with coral because of the contamination and other factors. So we use this as a demonstration that these filaments, based on blueberry waste, can be used actually to tie the different materials in the deep ocean, or not too deep, but anyhow, underwater, to have this coral reef growing. And currently, then, we're following this in real life, looking underwater about how this will happen with time. So beautiful example, maybe a little bit more exotic compared to the regular textiles, making the filament that you see on the right to hold the materials, typically relying on plastics. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation. We want to have coral reef, but we put also contaminants, plastics, in the bottom of the ocean. Anyway, finally, in the idea of circular bioeconomy, I want to share with you something that a good friend of mine put together, and I maybe edited a little bit. But think about it. When we use wood fibers, what we're doing is capturing sunlight, CO2, and water to produce a material. And this is the forest biomass. And most of the forest biomass end in construction. And that's what you see here. The full circle is 500 years. And this is the lifetime of the material. In the smaller circles that you see inside, here we have the case of paper. It's beautiful. Paper is one of the materials that can be recycled quite effectively. We know how to do it. It's a beautiful example. In the past, people say paper can be recycled by 9 times or so. Now we're finding 24 times is the number of times that you can recycle paper. The problem here is construction, and there is a huge opportunity for woody waste to recirculate the material and create new materials. And this is the idea of wood recycling. Here I put a little bit of concept of topochemistry. If you think about the waste wood that exists in any country, panel A, this is really a major problem in urban areas. What to do with wood. And this is important for us to really fulfill the full circular economy. So the idea here is super simple. This is the work of Lombay, who was in Aalto and also then stayed for 3 years with me, 2 years in UBC. The idea is to take wood and do a little bit of topochemistry. The idea here is to dissolve partially wood at the interface and let then the material to glue with each other. And for that, one of the key components is to move lignin around. That's why I call it topochemistry. Anyhow, partial dissolution of the woody biomass serves as an internal glue to put things together. We found this long time ago when we were doing all cellulose spinning. We have a cellulose solution together mixed with a cellulose microparticle or fibrils. Together can form very strong filaments that are cellulose in cellulose. Here is the same case. It's wood in wood. So partial dissolution of wood allows us to put this together in such a way that we obtain materials that are produced from wood waste. And we have used waste furniture, wood branches, decayed wood, even sawdust. And just by this simple technique, similar a little bit, but not entirely, to the concept of transparent wood that is very well known from the work in Sweden, also in Maryland, as well as in EMPA and ETH. Similar, but not exactly. The idea here is to put wood back together and produce materials that outperform the initial material. So we start with wood, natural wood, and we get something that is stronger than the natural wood after this process of partial dissolution and healing. We call this process healing. So here we have the situation of extracting the function from wood. And all the functions that I mentioned earlier can be really harvested when we process woody biomass, fibers, lignin, cellulose. And in the rest of the days, we're going to see more examples of this. It's really a beautiful opportunity. With that, I finish just to acknowledge the funding support and also to advertise 3 conferences that we're going to have in Vancouver. And I hope to see many of you in Vancouver. The first one in August. No, sorry, this is when? I forgot. It's a mechanical pulping conference. That will be, I think, in May. Very important. I think, in my view, mechanical pulping is coming back. It's very important to think about chemical-free pulping processes, and mechanical pulping is one of those. Then the Sustainable Conference and the Ligno Biotech, both in August. So many of you I know will come, but I really wish that as many of you can come and welcome you to Vancouver.